All right. And are you seeing what I'm hoping you're seeing?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, thank you so much. Always just want to check. All right, so thank you so much for letting me be here today. My name is Martha Walter, and I am a psychologist at the Waisman Center in the Down Syndrome Clinic. I'm very excited to be here with everyone today. So today I will be talking about behavior and behavior supports across the lifespan. I'll be thinking about how to understand a little bit more about behavior, as well as strategies for preventing and intervening with behavior. And a quick note that with limited time, I won't be able to go in depth into everything, but I'm hoping to cover some of the big things, and that hopefully you may feel like you can walk away with a couple ideas. And so when I'm talking about behavior today, a lot of what I'm thinking about are challenging behaviors, but also we'll talk about some of the ways to support positive behavior. And one just quick note about behavior is that can be really helpful to be specific when we're talking about behavior. So it's really common to use language like aggression or meltdown or outbursts or things like that, or non-compliance, but it can be really helpful to be very clear and discreet about what exactly does it look like. Is it kicking with your foot or throwing something or whatever the behavior is, so that whoever is working together with the individual is kind of thinking and talking about the same behavior. Dr. Hartley covered some of the major or common behaviors that we can see in Down syndrome, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. So a really helpful and important thing to be thinking about is that no matter how challenging, we really think about behavior as communication, that an individual is using that challenging behavior, whether that's the hitting or throwing or the stuck behavior, whatever the behavior is, this is a form of communication. They are communicating something with that behavior. And so the first question we really want to ask ourselves when we're facing this is, what do we think they're trying to communicate with this behavior? In general, there are 4 main reasons that we see behaviors happen. And these are called what we call the function of the behavior. So one function is called sensory or automatic. This is a behavior that happens either because there's something that might feel good about the behavior, or it might reduce anxiety and make us feel better when we do the behavior, or there's just something about it that has an internal motivation for that behavior. The next function we call escape or avoidance. So using a behavior because this situation is too hard for me, it's too frustrating, I don't want to do this right now. Using it as a way to kind of escape that challenging, difficult situation. A third function of behavior is attention. So a behavior that's used to let someone know, hey, I want to communicate with you, be with you. I want you to see what I'm doing. Just a way to kind of gain the attention of someone else, a peer, an adult. And the last one is to gain access to something tangible or physical. This could vary. It could be food, it could be a preferred activity, it could be electronics. A behavior that's used to say, hey, I want this, I need this. This is how I'm communicating that. It is very important to understand the function of a behavior before we think about how to intervene, because how we respond or how we develop strategies to address the behavior really can vary based on the function or functions of the behavior. So for example, we may respond to a behavior that's for avoidance or escape very differently from how we respond to a behavior that's happening for a sensory reason. And then I also really want to highlight that it's super important to think about whether there's any medical explanation for the behavior. So we want to think about, is this person in pain? Are they uncomfortable? Are they sick? Are they not sleeping well? Is there any medical reason to think about what's going on with this behavior? And this is true always, but especially when we see a new behavior or a behavior that dramatically worsens or changes. We really want to think about whether there's a medical explanation. So it's not always clear what the function or functions of a behavior are. And so in this case, we need to do some data collection or data gathering to try to figure out what that is. And so the process of gathering that information to figure out the function of a behavior is called the ABCs of behavior. The A stands for antecedent. It's whatever it is that comes right before the behavior. Sometimes people call that a trigger, but it's really whatever it is that's immediately right before we see that behavior happen. So if there's like a hitting that happens, what was it that happened right before the hitting? Was it the TV was turned off, or was it a direction that was given? Really thinking about what happened right before. Then the B is for the behavior, again, that discrete observable behavior. And then the C is consequence. The word consequence can have a negative connotation, but in this situation, it's not necessarily negative. It could be something that feels positive or negative. The consequence is whatever happens right after the behavior. So that could be the individual, leaving the table and going somewhere else. It could be someone talking to the person. It could be a reward that's earned for a positive behavior. It could be attention that's received from a sibling or peer. It's really whatever happens right after. And interestingly, it's the consequence that really helps determine whether we're likely to see the behavior again. If it's helpful, especially if you have concerns and want to talk to someone to support you in that area, it can be helpful to gather data ahead of time. This is an example of a sheet you could find online, an ABC chart, where you can start to keep track of when you're seeing the behavior, where it's happening, and what's happening right before and after. And this really helps us get a sense of whether there's any patterns to the behavior. This process of gathering information can also be called an FBA, or functional behavior assessment. So in terms of strategies for addressing behaviors, we typically think about two broad groups of strategies. One is prevention strategies, and the other is consequence strategies. So the idea with prevention strategies is to try to set the environment up in such a way that that individual may not need to use that challenging behavior to communicate. So helping to set it up so that they have other ways to communicate or other ways of having needs met that don't require that challenging behavior. So I'll talk about a few of these visuals in a moment. One tool can be arranging the environment. And so that could be, if there's a specific concern, like staying up really late at night on a tablet, maybe the Wi-Fi turns off at a certain time at night, or maybe there's less access to things at certain times of the day that are kind of contributing to challenging behaviors. Doing things in small doses can be a really helpful strategy. Sometimes doing an activity in its whole typical length can be just too hard, like doing a whole week's or month's grocery shopping trip. That just might be too much. And so starting with a few items or just your produce or something like that can be a way to try to prevent some of the challenging behaviors. Sometimes too with directions, I think especially thinking about what Dr. Hartley was talking about with processing verbal information, it can be a lot to process. And so breaking it down into smaller steps, focusing on one step at a time can be really helpful too. Similar on the bottom with changing how we ask or respond, changing from only verbal directions to a visual direction or showing what we're looking for can be a helpful strategy. Or thinking about avoiding certain words, like if the word no is a real stressful thing, maybe we can provide choices or that first then language, or this is when we'll do this. So it's not that we can't do this, it's that we'll do this in 1 hour, 10 minutes, whatever that might be. Changing the order of events can be really helpful too. It's really hard to change from something fun and enjoyable to something less enjoyable. So if it's possible to flip-flop that and say brush teeth before our TV show before bed, that can be helpful too. And then, as Dr. Hartley mentioned, routines can be a real strength for individuals with Down syndrome. And so creating a routine where there isn't one can be really helpful. So if mornings are chaotic, getting ready for school or for work is really hard, perhaps putting in a schedule or a routine might be a solution to try. And then with setting events, those are things like how hungry am I? How tired am I? How well did I sleep last night? Did I take my usual medication? Just kind of keeping those in mind can be really helpful. And we may not be able to change, how fast someone's going to get better, but we can keep it in mind when we're thinking about how much demand or things that we're placing on the individual. So visuals. Many clinicians who have the pleasure of working with individuals with Down syndrome love visuals and use them a lot. They can be a super powerful tool, especially given what we learned about the visual strengths for individuals with Down syndrome. On the right, there is an example of a choice board. So if unstructured times are hard, having a visual of like appropriate activities that we can do during that time can be a nice strategy. Visual timers, like on the left, these can be awesome tools to help make that extremely abstract idea of time more concrete. Social stories, video modeling to help an individual understand what to expect or what's going to happen can also be really great tools. Visual schedules are a wonderful strategy to consider using. There's a few examples on this slide. They vary dramatically in what they can look like. It's really just whatever you think would work best for the person you're working with or your loved one. It can be high tech, low tech, pictures, words, paper, whiteboard, chalkboard, a document from Microsoft Word. It can really be quite variable, whatever would be the best format for the individual that you are doing this with. And again, to do it with them is really helpful to help them be involved in creating it and deciding what goes on the schedule. One key thing is that it should make things easier and simpler. And so we might want to focus on one part of the day, not the entire day, kind of doing things in smaller chunks, making it very clear and having the things be positive, not negative. So instead of don't hit, we might say safe hands, something like that. We want to kind of make it clear what we'd like to see happen rather than what we don't want to see. And then that picture in sort of the middle at the top is an example from a book by Dr. Stein, which I have in the resources. There's a behavior that can be kind of common in Down syndrome that he calls the stop and flop behavior. So it's that time when someone might kind of freeze, they might sit on the ground and just kind of like not move forward. And so this can happen for different reasons. If it's overstimulating, overwhelming, boring, whatever the environment might be. And so one strategy that he talks about in his book is using a visual schedule for certain situations. So this is an example of a grocery store trip where going through the whole trip is a lot. And so they sort of came up with certain jobs for this individual to do where they had to find 5 items in the grocery store, spaced throughout the store, and then earned a sort of reward at the end for doing that. Another strategy or intervention that I think about a lot with families is called different names, together time, special playtime for younger people. But this is a strategy that can be really nice when we have some of those attention function behaviors we mentioned, where an individual might be using less than ideal ways to get someone's attention. So this is kind of a proactive strategy to build in a predictable time each day or a few times a week where the individual knows that they're going to have some special one-to-one time with whoever the person is, a caregiver or someone else. And so this involves like a short time, 5 to 10 minutes, great to use a timer to keep it short and positive, where you will engage in an activity that they choose, that they want to do, and provide only neutral and positive attention. And there's several examples on this slide, but really thinking about providing only that neutral and positive attention and limiting any questions, directions, redirections. We want to ignore minor misbehavior at this point and just try to keep it really positive and end on a good note. This can be a really nice strategy for giving kind of what I think of as like a high dose of that positive attention for appropriate behaviors. Difficulty with transitions is a really common behavior concern. A couple other ideas we can try, including that first then language, is it can be really helpful to pair the like preferred and non-preferred activities. So if going from one room in a building, like the classroom to the lunchroom is really hard, try pairing that with something they enjoy, like walking with a friend. The high probability requests are things like building that positive behavior momentum. So if it's getting dressed as the target behavior, maybe we start with a high five and then we both jump up and down. And then, we do something else and then we put our socks on. So something where we're kind of building that positive behavior momentum. So the other big category of strategies we use with behavior are consequence strategies. Again, not me using consequence in a negative way, but consequence meaning whatever happens right after the behavior. And so this can be things like providing positive attention for behaviors we want to see more of. So things like social attention, hugs, high fives, praise, when we see a behavior that we're wanting to see more of. So those like safe hands or doing the laundry or whatever the behavior is that you're working on. It could be tangible things like small toys, stickers, electronics time, could be food, could be special activities, could be money or allowance. It just all depends on the person you're with. And then token systems. Don't have time to go into detail in, but I have a couple examples here. This is a format for providing small sort of tokens like stickers or points to build up to a bigger reward. And so this can be helpful sometimes for older individuals. It can be helpful when the thing they really want, like in that one example, maybe a trip to the store or a restaurant, isn't something you can do immediately. So it's something you can build up to over time. And another consequence strategy I want to briefly mention is this idea of planned ignoring. In general, we really want to focus on positive reinforcement and positive attention for behaviors we want to see more of. It's a much more powerful learning tool. But one of the behaviors Dr. Hartley mentioned that's common is elopement or bolting or wandering. And in that situation, sometimes there needs to be an element of this strategy. So planned ignoring means removing some of the attention that we give with our voice, with our body language, our face, our eye contact for behaviors that are occurring to get our attention. And so in general, we have to be very careful about behaviors we use this with because we can't ignore some behaviors. And actually, elopement is one of those we cannot ignore because it's a safety issue. So we have to keep everyone safe. We have to stop the person. We have to, keep them safe. But what we can choose or try to do is to limit the amount of attention we're giving in other ways, like with our tone of voice, with our eye contact, with our facial expressions. So we can, when this happens, keep that person safe. We have to do that, but try to limit the other forms of attention that you're providing at that time. And then also we can think about preventative strategies, safeguards we can put into place in the home or in the school building or the work building, wherever that may be, to help reduce the likelihood that this will happen, or to provide some just to get against safeguards like alarms or things like that to help keep them safe. And then the last thing I want to mention is those sensory or self-stimulatory behaviors, because this comes up quite a bit. And I think what I wanted to mention about this is that there may be many of these behaviors that happen, again, because it feels good or reduces anxiety. And if it's not hurting someone, including themselves or others, or significantly interfering with their life, we may not need to address it at all. We may not need to intervene. If it's something that involves privacy, we can help to establish boundaries. So like, this is a behavior that's private. We only do in our room with the door closed or in the bathroom, for example. If there are some of these behaviors that are causing harm to someone, a great person to work with, if it's possible, is an occupational therapist, because what we want to think about is not just eliminating the behavior, period, but we want to think about replacing it with something else that's safe and helps meet the same need that that behavior was serving for the person. So I have a few resources here on visual supports. That book by Dr. Stein, I highly recommend, is really a helpful one. And just my last note would be that there are lots of people that are hopefully available to support you if you're dealing with some challenging behaviors. As Dr. Hartley mentioned, a lot of these are common behaviors, but some do occur above and beyond what we'd expect. That might be explained by something like autism or anxiety or things like that. And it can be helpful to reach out to your healthcare team about those if you have concerns or questions about that. So again, case managers, primary care providers, school team, therapists, these are all great people to tap into if you need some support around behavior. And I will stop there. Thank you so much.